Welcome back to Big Data and Bruce, today with Dr. Michael Wu. Would you mind to introduce yourself and maybe talk a little bit about your drink too?
Oh, okay. So I'm Dr. Michael Wu from Lithium Technologies. So we are a enterprise SaaS company to help big brands to connect and engage and understand their customers. And my role at Lithium is basically as a chief scientist, we're trying to basically try to prototype algorithm to understand consumer behavior. And we also try to actually help company understand the ROI of engaging their customer. Yeah, I think that's in essence what we do.
So you have a really interesting background, right? So and I think the most super advanced data scientists somehow have biology or physics or complete math background. That's a little bit unusual, but usually in those two categories. Mm-hmm. You want to talk a little bit, how did you get into this whole thing, and where's the overlap and what fascinates you on data, giving that background?
Yeah, so my background, I had a triple major in mathematics, physics, and also molecular biology.
So you hit them all.
Yeah, yeah, I hit them all, and to be honest, I feel like data science or big data, it's a little bit of a almost misnomer, because I feel like it's new in the industry, certainly in the business. People have been working with small data sets in the industry, but it's not new in a lot of other disciplines. Certainly in national security, and CIA is collecting big data for ages, and in science too, right? When you're analyzing particle accelerated data, the volume is huge, right? And astrophysicists, they have tons and tons of data as well. And likewise, in physics, in the area that I'm in, where we're trying to actually understand the brain. So I'm in biophysics, doing my PhD in biophysics. So my project is actually trying to understand how the brain processes visual information. So with that, we have we do experiments on subjects where we actually show visual stimulus, essentially movies, and while we record their brain activity. So basically, we have input that are movies, and then we have outputs, which are the brain activities of the subject, right? And then we basically use machine learning to map this input and output, right? So if we could do this mapping correctly, what does that mean? That means we have a model for how the brain works, right? We have a model of how the brain translate this input to the neural activity, right? So that's in essence what we do, and how it kind of I come to become a data scientist. Like I said, I feel like I have always been data science. I've been a data scientist before the data scientist job role has been coined. Right. And I think every scientist is data scientist in some way. Yeah. So coming into the industry is quite interesting. I always tell people that salespeople follow the data. Salespeople follow the money, scientists follow the data. Yeah. So wherever there's a lot of data, that's where you want to go, right? So basically, throughout my academic career, I've been kind of following where advancement in measurement has been made, right? So we could collect a lot of interesting data to make new discoveries. And coming into the industry is how I come in the industry is a little bit accidental, but I think in retrospective is not so accidental, because I come into the industry that actually has a lot of very interesting data, and social media is certainly generated so much data that we more than we can consume and analyze. So this is kind of natural, I would say.
I'm really curious about the project you talked about. You worked on the brain stimuli measurement and training. How many sensors did you use, and where's the limit of what we can do today to measure brain activity? And then maybe you can talk a little bit about the models you used. It's so fascinating.
Yeah. So let me go into maybe this a little detail. So the experiment that we do is basically we implant a little electrode that has essentially 64 channels, right? 8 by 8 grid. into a subject. I'm not going to review what kind of subject we use, and we essentially show movies. Essentially, and then those 64 grids of electrode is constantly measuring the brain.
So you built a brain-computer interface. It's already there.
Yeah,
So,
I mean almost. Yeah, essentially.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, we are just closing the loop, right? So we have control input that we show as an image, and we can measure the output right of the brain, and then through this grid of electrode, and that's how we could essentially use machine learning to bridge the gap between the two that closes that loop. Yeah.
I just looked at a company that did a 10,000 channel brain measurement device based on accelerated Adreno hardware that I thought was really interesting.
Hardware.
Yeah, so they had it's Adreno based, but they had like a very custom chip in there, and then they basically just stacked that. I think it was an ARM processor or something, and then of course they had like a big array that recorded all the signal data.
Yeah.
And they actually implemented this as open source hardware. I thought it was very interesting, and then. I thought like, oh, I could play with that, and I asked, it's like $10,000. It's not for hobbyists like me. Anyhow, I thought it was really interesting. What are the challenges to record brain activity?
I guess the challenge is noise. Right? I think that's traditionally has always been the problem. So I think there's actually two experimental setups that we work with. So one is where we implant the electro grid, and the other one is this fMRI. Basically, there we could use human subject, right? Because we actually want to understand human vision,
right?
And we can actually put a subject in a magnet and then make him watch a movie again, and then actually measure all that. So the voxel, right, in fMRI, each kind of volume of basically they split up into your brain into little kind of grids, like actually little cubes. They're called voxels, and then those voxels have activity and activation level, and then we measure those activation level in the fMRI machine, and then so those can go up to like thousands and tens of thousands of dimensions, because each imagine how many little tiny grids can fill up the brain, right? Yeah,
it's so interesting. We just talked to an astrophysicist, and he talked about using machine learning basically to find out, as the photons coming out of the air, and it stimulates the measurement plate, obviously through the currents in the atmosphere, right? It's not a straight point, but it's very distributed, and almost sounds a little bit like this. You're trying to separate kind of the noise from the signal, and trying to identify kind of the area in the brain.
Yeah, so the biggest challenge with noise is that it's isolation, right? Because when you measure, so these little grids in the voxels, actually, they're small. They're like, on the orders like, few millimeter, like 2 to 3 millimeter in actual size, but it still contains, hundreds and thousands of cells.
Right.
So when one neuron fire, right, actually, when you measure one voxel, the activity, you're actually measuring hundreds and thousands of neurons. It's sort of a local average, right? So to actually understand, what is understand at the single cell level, then we need a more finer spatial and temporal granularity.
Right.
So right now is the biggest challenge is actually how do you remove those noise.
And you're using machine learning for that, or?
So there are kind of noise removal techniques, but I don't think they're machine learning per se. Machine learning is really just, I would say, a way of using data to come up with a model. Right. Machine learning is just a toolbox in statistics, and so there are signal processing. For example, like independent component analysis, all these techniques, statistical techniques and signal processing techniques to isolate and remove noise.
And then let's talk a little bit about the models you're using. I assume you're going for a non-supervised learning approach, or?
They're actually, right now we're actually using supervised.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think for that project, and the reason is because we actually have the neural activity as a ground truth, right?
Okay.
So we have this model, right? The model is trying to mimic how the brain processes visual information, right? So, and you show the input to this model is images and movies, right?
Right. So you
Yeah.
okay.
So
you
those
have
are so those
you
are the
supervise
input,
it. Yeah.
right?
Okay.
So the output that what your brain actually did, how they actually react to this image is actually essentially the ground truth, right?
Right.
Essentially how it actually works, right? And we can use that to train that machine learning, that black box, right? To say, okay, now we actually, we have input, we have this model, which is a black box. I'm going to train it. I don't know how it should work, but then I also know how the brain actually react, right,
Yeah.
to these images. So I could use that to train the model to kind of mimic what that actual brain actually did.
Yeah.